What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about some of the most overrated trade assets in the NBA right now. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it and subscribe to the channel as well for more videos just like this one every single day. With those things said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so quite frankly, we're going to make some fan bases upset today because there's just a variety of players that I continue to see in trade rumors or discussed at a level that, quite frankly, they're just not at when it comes to their trade value. And as we are in NBA trade season, I think it's time to kind of discuss where I really think some of these guys are at in terms of their actual value in a trade. We're going to begin with Rudy Gobert. Rudy, if you follow the NBA at all, he's a controversial guy. There are people within the media that believe he is an MVP candidate and has been for years. And then there are people that, quite frankly, just don't think that he's good at basketball. I'm somewhere in between that. I understand the value that Rudy Gobert brings to the Utah Jazz, but I also understand his shortcomings, some of the issues that he's had in the postseason, some of the issues that he's had offensively in the past. And those two things come together to create a player that is really, really valuable for Utah, but is by no means a perfect player. And any time that there's a discussion about the Jazz potentially shaking things up, which isn't necessarily a common discussion at the moment because they're a really, really good team. They have a really good record. We've seen this movie before, right? The Jazz being really good in the regular season. But anytime, whether it be after a postseason disappointment or people just having a conversation about what Utah could do, a lot of the questions or a lot of the conversation revolves around trading Rudy Gobert and shaking up the roster in a way that allows them to be more flexible, not rely on him so much because they've become a team that is built pretty much entirely around what he does, certainly defensively, but then offensively as well as a screen setter, his ability to dive to the rim and finish at the rim. Everything Utah does when they do it well revolves around Rudy Gobert because of the way they've built their team. And if they were able to move him, maybe that added flexibility would, in the large part of the game, allow them to be a better basketball team. Now, the problem with Rudy is that when it comes to trade stuff, people treat him as a trade asset relative to the level of player that he is. Rudy Gobert is a very, very good player. He's one of the better bigs in the league, certainly defensively. But the problem is, in a trade scenario, you're not just trading for how good of a player that other player is. You're trading for how relevant they are relative to their position in the league, how important their position in the league is, and their contract, among a variety of other factors. And quite frankly, Rudy Gobert is going to be an overpaid player within the next couple of years once he gets into this new contract that he signed. I mean, we're looking at a player that's going to be averaging a ton of money that's typically reserved for either focal point offensive big guys, Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, or perimeter players that are focal points offensively, neither of which Rudy Gobert is. He's incredibly valuable, but his skill set is not necessarily unique. It is unique to the level at which he does it, but the skill set itself is not all that unique. So when it comes to a trade, he's not nearly as valuable to another team that would potentially be trading for him as he is to Utah. So when it comes to his value as a trade asset, he is continually overvalued and potentially undervalued in terms of his impact on Utah in terms of winning basketball games. But as a trade asset, I can't imagine that there would be a lot of teams that would be excited to trade for Rudy Gobert, given the position that he plays, given how easy it is to find guys that do similar things to him at a much lower level, at a much cheaper price, and given the contract status as well, giving him the title of, in this video, one of the most overrated trade assets in the NBA right now. Next up on the list, I'm going to make some people mad. It's RJ Barrett. I've talked about this in the beginning of the season about how basically the video was titled Players I've Given Up On. And I haven't given up on RJ Barrett as an NBA player, but as like this future all-star, like all NBA caliber guy, I just don't see that ceiling for him anymore. As a prospect, I did. And I was willing to look past a lot of the issues that he had at Duke when it came to tunnel vision and not being as willing of a passer, because I saw a guy that had a fantastic frame, could get to the rim, was going to improve as a jump shooter, and had the ability to pass. It was more so about an unwillingness to do so. But since he's been in the league, he has improved, but I just don't see those high upside, high ceiling characteristics of a guy that's a future all NBA caliber player. And when he's mentioned in trade scenarios and things like that, he's kind of treated like one. He's treated like a guy that's going to be a future all NBA guy. And I just don't see that. I don't see the high-level shot making and the smoothness of an offensive game that would allow me to believe that he's going to be that kind of guy. I don't see the playmaking that I would like to when it comes to being like the focal point perimeter offensive creator. And I know he's only a few years into his career, but at a certain point, you'd like to start to see some of those flashes. And what I see from RJ are flashes of a really, really solid player, a guy that's going to make a ton of money, a guy that is going to be able to guard and, you know, provides great size as a 2-guard, can be a secondary ball handler, but he's not a top 2 guy on a title winning team. And he's kind of treated like one. And so when I see scenarios in which RJ's moved for, you know, a superstar, whether it be Dame or whatever the case may be, I understand the reasoning behind that because he is the best young asset they have on the roster. But I just don't believe in him as this guy that is one of the better young assets in the league. Like, he's not on Jalen Brown's level as a trade asset. He's just not. And sometimes I feel like people treat him as that. And that really doesn't have anything to do with some of the struggles that he's had to begin this season. I would have had that opinion before the year, which is when that first video came out in terms of, you know, believing or not believing in RJ Barrett moving forward. So it's no disrespect to RJ. It's not that I think that he's going to be a bad player. I just don't see the ceiling that some other people do. And that ceiling being attached to him as a trade asset is, I think, largely what fuels his value. And ultimately, I think that's a mistake. Next up, Jalen Brunson. This one hurts because I love Jalen Brunson. I think he's actually one of the more underrated, like, actual basketball players in the league. But there's a couple of problems with his trade value. First, and this is going to be a theme for the next player as well on this list. When a team is marginally close to being a contender, the way Dallas is, and they have 2 focal points of the roster, the way they have with Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis, the other guys on the roster get thrown into a million different trades, trying to find a way to get that third player without giving up KP, without giving up Luka. And sometimes it does happen. You go back and you think about when Milwaukee got Drew Holiday, they really didn't give up that much in terms of from a player standpoint, but they gave up a million draft picks and they were able to get that third guy. And sometimes that does happen. But in the case of Dallas, like, I'm seeing like Jalen Brunson for legitimate all-stars, like Jalen Brunson and Maxi Kleber in a pick for legitimate all-stars. And I think that just comes from this desire we have to have Luka be surrounded by better players and to have a true star that we thought KP was going to be. And, you know, KP's fine, but he's not like an all-NBA level guy. And we want that for Luka. We want to see what it looks like when he doesn't have to do literally everything for them. And that in turn raises in our head the value of guys like Jalen Brunson because of what we want for Luka, because of what we want to see in Dallas. But realistically, Jalen Brunson is a smaller guard that's very good. He can play make, he can score, he can shoot. I love his game. But there's like a million point guards. There's a million perimeter creator guys. And if you're not one of the 15 to 20 best perimeter creators in the league, there's like 40 other guys that can do what you do at a, you know, to a certain extent. And unless you're one of these really great 6-man types like Jordan Clarkson, the value is just not there from a trade perspective because there's so many guys like that. And it's the most saturated position in the league. And Brunson needs a new contract. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. So seeing him thrown around as the focal point of a star trade, I wish it was true. I'd like to see what that would look like in Dallas, but ultimately, I think our desire to see a third star in Dallas is what's driving the value of Jalen Brunson up more than anything else. Speaking of that, a guy who wasn't necessarily the motivation for this list, but I knew he was going to be on it as soon as I had the idea. Taylor Horton-Tucker for the LA Lakers. This to me is just a typical. Again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. This is just the best way I can phrase it. It's a Lakers thing. It is. It's a Lakers thing where they have a decent young player that has some flashes, and all of a sudden he's like the focal point of star trades. It's kind of like the Tyler Hero thing when it was like Tyler Hero is the focal point of a James Harden trade, except Taylor Horton-Tucker has proved like 5% as much in the NBA as Tyler Hero had at that point and has now played even better since. It doesn't make any sense to me if you just take it in a vacuum and you look at what Taylor Horton-Tucker has done to begin his career and you watch him play basketball. There's nothing that tells you that he should be the focal point of a star trade. Quite frankly, there's nothing that tells you that the Lakers should have chosen him monetarily over Alex Caruso. Alex Caruso has been fantastic for Chicago. This Lakers team would be much better if they had chosen to keep him rather than Taylor Horton-Tucker. And I understand it's similar to the Brunson thing. Like, he's young. It's a team that needs to make an adjustment from a roster perspective, and they don't really have a ton of other interesting young guys that would actually be trade assets. And so you want Talen Horton-Tucker to be something. You want him to be a guy that steps up and is a rotation player consistently and someone that, could be a borderline starter, can score and can guard, can shoot. You want him to be all those things. He's just not. Maybe he will be someday. But from a trade perspective, the value just isn't there. And it's just a Lakers thing. It really, really is. And he just, if this list was going to be made, he had to be on it. Last up, I'm going to put Jeremy Grant on the list because it has nothing to do with Jeremy Grant as a player. It's just a situational thing. So Jeremy Grant, the version of him that exists right now in Detroit would cease to exist if he was traded. Because in pretty much any scenario that he would be traded, it would be to a contender. It would be like Aaron Gordon going to Denver. It would be, Philadelphia. It would be a situation in which the Jeremy Grant that we've, become accustomed to in Detroit as a high volume shot creator, an isolation guy, would just cease to exist. And he would go back to being a guy that can shoot, create a little bit for you, but mostly be a really, really good defender. And that's awesome. However, in trade stuff, people are treating him like he's going to be Detroit Jeremy Grant and average 20 a game on his new team, and that quite simply would not be the case, not to mention the fact that when it comes to actual trade value, if you are sending Jeremy Grant to a variety of different contenders, it's relatively likely that they're not going to have a ton of assets to trade for Jeremy Grant, thus lowering his trade value once again, because they just don't really have the assets. There's no point in there's no point in San Antonio trading for Jeremy Grant, because he's just going to be Jeremy Grant in the Detroit version all over again. But that doesn't really raise the ceiling of San Antonio that much. It's a weird situation, but ultimately I have him on the list as well. Let me know down in the comment section what you guys think of this list. I am positive there are going to be a lot of opinions about this, and I'm very interested to see them. With that said, that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the box on screen, subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one every single day as well. With all those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your Friday. Forgot to mention this, Happy New Year's Eve. Hope we go into 2022 and is a much better year for everyone involved. And hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll see you next year, fellas. Peace.